Okay, I wanted to quickly talk through some event operations. Let's start with security. Most events that you've been to have security. Maybe you've gone through a metal detector, or had your bag checked, or you've seen somebody that has a shirt on or a jacket that says security. There's lots of different types of security that can be used for special events, but we're going to talk about three. The first is pure security. Those are people just like you and me. They're people that are hired to help with the event and have a security shirt on. They may not be well trained in security, but they're acting in a security role. If you've ever been to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, these are the folks in their yellow shirts that say Safety Patrol. If you've been to the State Fair, these are our folks in yellow shirts that say Security. They're folks just like you and me that are acting and hired as security for an event. Uniform security is more formal. Uniform security is where we see contract companies such as ESG, CSC, Securitas, and many others around town. They've got a higher level of training and a distinct uniform. They're the ones performing bag searches, operating the metal detectors, breaking up fights, securing the floor, the locker rooms, the concert venue, backstage, those types of things at an event. Armed security is law enforcement. Law enforcement cannot work while they're on duty unless the city, state, or federal government is sponsoring the event. So when we talk about armed security, we're almost always talking about off-duty law enforcement. They're hired by a company and are able to work at an event as law enforcement, but not with their specific department. At the fairgrounds, we use this mostly for managing our traffic, but they also provide security inside the events to assist our contract company with the metal detectors, searches, and anything that might happen during the event, like a fight, a bomb threat, or an active shooter. Let's move on to the next element of event operations and talk about medical care. If you have a significant number of people at your event, there's a good chance you're going to have a medical incident. It might be something as simple as a child tripping and falling, or it might be someone having a heart attack. There has to be access to the venue for medical personnel if they're not on site. Remember, people's number one reaction is to call 911. They have to get there somehow. If you're planning a large event, you should plan to have medical care at your event. There's different levels of care that we learned about at the beginning of the semester. There's advanced life support. These are your paramedics that can administer drugs. And there's basic life support. These are your EMTs that can provide first aid. Think about what's happening at your event and where you might want different levels of care to be provided. When we host the rodeo, we provide ALS for the rodeo participants, but BLS for the crowd who came to watch the event. You might have mobile teams, first aid posts, or even a temporary hospital depending on the venue and the event. Most events have mobile teams. Think about the IUPUI Regatta on the downtown canal. It's a large area, but not a lot of space to get an ambulance around. There's EMTs that are walking through the crowd, and there's even EMTs on a golf cart. Now let's think about an arena. They might not have EMTs roaming the building, but they would have a first aid building or a first aid room within the building. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway even has a temporary hospital on site. They can do medevac from the speedway. They also can provide trauma level care at that site. If you're bringing medical resources to the event, make sure that they can bring any equipment that they need, and if you have equipment, they know where to find it. We store some wheelchairs, backboards, and we have plenty of AEDs on our property, so we always make sure the medical teams know where that equipment is. And lastly, think about ambulance transports. Maybe you don't need an ambulance on site, but if somebody gets injured or needs to go to the hospital and they're in the middle of your event, you have to get them to an ambulance somehow. What is the route they're going to use, and how efficient is it? Let's now look at fire and life safety. Some events require firefighters to be at the event depending on what's happening. Anytime there's pyrotechnics, fireworks, or you're Disabling a part of a fire alarm system, you have to have firefighters at the event. A lot of times, fire alarm systems are delayed during events that are nationally televised. We do this for all of our hockey games as well as other events in the Coliseum. Anytime you're hosting an event, you have to follow all fire and building codes provided by the state of Indiana and local ordinances, making sure that you're not overloading electrical outlets, pinching electrical cords between doors, and creating other electrical hazards. Making sure staging and temporary structures are constructed correctly and they're in an appropriate location is also important. Fire and life safety also dictates your evacuation routes and the types of alarms that you have at a venue. It's really important to make sure that you have enough exits for people to leave in case something happens. When you cause mass panic, like a fire starting, a bomb going off, or someone hearing gunshots, it's important to know that all the evacuation routes are going to be available and doors are not blocked. For workers at an event, it's also important to adhere to all the Occupational Health and Safety Administration guidelines, or OSHA guidelines. This includes things like fall protection for people working up in the rigging, lockout tagout for anyone working on electrical equipment, other electrical rules, and then making sure your staff have proper evacuation routes and you've followed all fire prevention procedures. Lastly, with event operations, I want to talk about communication. You're not going to get much done at your event if you can't communicate well within your team. Everybody uses different channels on the same radio. The fire department has a different frequency than the police department, which has a different frequency than transportation, and a different frequency than the emergency managers. There are shared channels that are able to be used, and so establishing what those channels are going to be and making sure everybody can talk on the radios at the same time is really important. Interoperable communication means that no matter what your function is, we can communicate between functions. So a good example is between medical and police, or between fire and medical. The event team needs communication as well. Maybe your event team doesn't have radio, so how are you going to contact each other? Will you use phone calls, text messages, a group text, an app? There's lots of options out there, but you have to be able to communicate with your event team. Public address is the easiest way to communicate with the people at your event. Maybe that's using a bullhorn and somebody standing on the stage. Maybe you have a wired PA system throughout the building. This is the easiest way to get warnings out to people and to have them follow your directions. There's other warning systems like tornado sirens that could be of use for outdoor events as well. So there's a lot of options to consider with communication. That's just a little bit about event operations.